Welcome back everybody to 2022, and it is time for my update to the best genetic genealogy websites. This is an update I've been doing every year for the past 5 years where I review the major genetic genealogy companies and tell you who I think is the best right now. Now let's just do a quick review of what makes a good website. And I've mentioned some of this criteria in the past. First off, matches. In fact, if your website, if your company does not have matching, it's not even going to be reviewed as part of this video. So in the comment section, if you are wondering, hey, why isn't X company on there? Well, check and see if they have matches. If they're not, then they're not going to be on here. But matches is really the basis of genetic genealogy. You have to see how you match somebody else, and then from there figure out how you are related. Now, the next one is tools. Besides just seeing that you're matched with other people, you also want to be able to use different tools to go more in depth. And so I'm also looking at the tools that the different sites will have. And finally, the third thing that makes a great website is collaboration. There's got to be a way to share information with other people. There's got to be a way to contact other people and solicit some of that information that you may not have. So these three things are what make a good genetic genealogy website. Now, each year I have made changes to my formula. I've made changes to the weighting. I've made changes sometimes to even the point system, and 2022 is no different. I did make some changes, and so that's with that in mind, comparing year to year is not really practicable because of that, because of these changes, but I do it anyway. So what did I change this year? Well, first off, I changed the weighting system. I went through and I looked at the information, and it wasn't necessarily that I thought the weighting system was completely off, so much as when I went into my formulas, I saw I had some weighting in the formulas that was not reflected in the overall weighting. And so I went back through and removed that to make the formulas simpler, and then just changed the weighting system because of that. And I also updated the website ratings. Basically, websites change as far as what matches we have, how big the database is, and so on. And so I had to go through and change that information as well. Now, I have a link to the file in the description below. It is the same file that I've been using all 5 or 6 years. So you can go in and you can actually see how I did. You can save a copy of that file for yourself and put in your own numbers to see whether or not it is the same as mine, because each person, they may value different things. And so I wouldn't actually expect my list of the best genetic genealogy companies to be your list of the best genetic genealogy companies. So without further ado, let me go in and explain one term that I use quite a bit. And this has related to collaboration, or I call it genealogy activity. Now, this is a multiplier for some of the factors that I use. And it is different for each website because each website does things differently. It would be nice for uniformity if all the websites got together and it says, hey, we're all going to do X, Y, and Z. But they don't. Ancestry does X, Y, and Z. MyHeritage does A, B, and C. And then sometimes we have a company that does Z, Y, and A. And so there's a little overlap between how companies do different things, but each website's different. Now, for the genealogy activity, this is loosely based on the database size. And I say loosely because sometimes involves how much there is, but it also involves how much that database might be talking. And so different companies have different things. Now, the multiplier I use is somewhere between 0.25 to 0.62. And this can involve, how many people have trees on there, or users, how often they're logging into the website, different things like this. I'm basically trying to gather some information from all these different websites and come up with values that I can use as this genealogy activity multiplier that isn't totally outlandish. So the first factor that I want to discuss here is database size. And this is 30% of the overall score. And what I have done with this is it is the number of millions of kits. And I actually have limited this. I started limiting it last year, I believe it was, maybe 2 years ago, limiting it to 13 million kits, because I found that really after about 13 million, I don't necessarily see as much of a benefit from the database size. Now, right now, there's only 2 companies that have that many, but we take the millions of kits and we multiply that by the genealogy activity score, which I just talked about. And this gives you an effective database size. We'll say what the database really is from, who's going to answer you, what kind of information you're going to be able to get from the people that have tested there. For instance, if somebody tests and they don't have a tree and they never answer their email, and let's say they just have a funky name, so it's not even like their real name, it makes it very difficult to try to find any information out about that person. And so their kit is basically downgraded by this factor so that it's worth less. So who's the winner when it comes to database size? Well, this one actually should be pretty obvious right now. It is Ancestry. Ancestry not only has the largest database, but because they're set up for genealogy, they have a fairly active user base as well. So I've calculated based on like criteria about 5.2. In other words, effectively their database is 5.2 million. 23andMe also has a very large database, but there's not as much genealogy activity on 23andMe. And so even though both of those companies may have more than 13 million, Ancestry would still have a higher score just because of the higher genealogy activity. It is possible for a smaller database to have a larger score here if there was a massive amount of genealogy activity going on with that database. So Ancestry gets the win on that factor. The next factor is the quality match score, and this is 15%. And when you actually look at the total number of points, the quality match is roughly equal to what the database size is, because what we want is quality matches. Now, what do I mean by that? I have a video that you can watch, but let me just explain in general. You take the number of matches between 35 centimorgans and 600 centimorgans. Now, these, when you look at that range, are going to be the people that you are related to, that it is likely that you'll be able to find out how you're related to them, but you possibly don't know. So we're on the very bottom end of first cousins, which most people probably know who most of their first cousins are, all the way down into third and fourth cousins where 35 centimorgans might fit. But we take this number, we divide it by the number of millions of kits in the database. So in other words, you can have a small database, but if because of, let's just say, the population testing that database is done and it is similar to your genetic makeup, you might have more matches in that database than another database which is larger, which is spread throughout the world. And I take all this and I multiply it by the genealogy activity score, and that gives me my total quality match score. And this is one that actually has varied quite a bit over the years as companies have changed how they're reporting, they've done different algorithms, they've made updates, and so I've seen actually quite a bit of variability. So who is the quality match winner? Well, it is Family Tree DNA, actually. Even though they have the smallest database, or one of the smallest databases, it turns out that from a quality match score, I have more matches per million of people in their database than any of the other databases. Now, previous years, I have always said with Family Tree DNA, you had to go in and you had to adjust the data because they included all the small segments. Last year, they made a change where they took out those small segments, those tiny segments below, I'm not sure if it's 7 or 6 centimorgans. And so now you don't have to go in and correct everything. And they, I believe, were the winner last year in this category as well. They have always been very good at identifying people that are in that 35 to 600 centimorgan range, even though they got such a small database. That may work for me because their population that they have primarily tested, you could say, is of European origin or even of English origin. That's where the majority of my ancestry comes from. And so that their company has a good score. This is one that you want to go into that spreadsheet and figure out what your score is, because it might be different. Another company may be the better company here when it comes to quality matches. So we have one for Ancestry and one for Family Tree DNA. Now the third criteria I have is triangulation. Triangulation simply means the ability to triangulate segments. In other words, you have to be able to match A to B, B to C, and C back to A. Now, why triangulation I think is really important is because while sharing DNA with one match is an indicator that you are related at some point, sharing DNA with two matches who also share DNA with each other at the exact same segment is very strong evidence that you are related through a common ancestor. Now, the larger that segment is, the more recent that ancestor is, and more likely that you're going to be able to identify how you are related. So I use triangulation a lot in DNA research because it is a very powerful tool to show that whatever hypothesis that you put together is probably correct if you've got triangulated segments as part of that. So who is the winner with triangulation? Well, it happens to be GEDmatch. GEDmatch actually allows you to do triangulation in lots of different ways. They have triangulation of just you and two people. They have triangulation of you and multiple people all at the same time. They allow you to see triangulated segments over your entire chromosomes. You can do this all manually, or you can do it with their paid triangulation tool. Now, doing it manually takes more time, but all the tools are there to do it manually. And so they have the broadest range of tools that help you with triangulation. So they came out on top here. So 3 criteria so far. We have 3 different companies that are winning each one of those criteria. Now, the next category I have is transfer, and that is the ability to transfer kits into the database and use their tools. Now, just from a money saving tip, this is important because then you don't have to buy kits from every single company. But also, it's better to be in multiple different databases. As I've already said, a couple of these criteria may not be the same for you as far as the best company. And so it behooves us to be able to put our DNA with each one of these companies because we don't know where that ancestor that we're looking for has tested. We want to be everywhere. So with the transfer, we have a tie, and that is GEDmatch and Living DNA. And the reason why these are tied is they both allow transfers in, and those transfers are free. You don't have to pay extra to be able to use the tools. There are some tools on some other websites that you can transfer in and use some of those, or you can get a little bit of information, but you have to pay a fee to have full access to it. If you test with Living DNA, you're going to get a certain set of tools with that, with the matches. If you transfer in, you're going to get the same one, and the same with GEDmatch. So finally, we have the X factor. Now, the X factor is 20% as far as the weight. And really, this is looking at what all useful tools are on the website. What can I do with my data that is there? To me, I think this category is a no-brainer because there is one website that stands above the rest when it comes to tools, and that's GEDmatch. It is not a testing company. In other words, you're not going to be able to test there, but you can upload any of your DNA kits to there, and they have a huge number of tools. Many of them do the same thing, just in different ways, which can be very helpful for people who, 1, learn in different ways, but 2, want to get there in different ways that might, help them find who that common ancestor is. GEDmatch, I think, has always been on top of this category because no other company has as many tools as they have. They have a score of 3 on this. Again, this is 20% of the overall grade. So with that, you've seen the layout of who wins each individual category. What I haven't shown you is I haven't shown you the ranking on each individual category, but it's time now to go through and talk about overall, when we add up all the categories together, who comes out on top. Number 6 is Living DNA. Now, Living DNA is the newest one to the game. They just came out a couple of, it's I guess been 3 years now or so. They have focused on DNA from Great Britain, and one of their claims to fame is the ability they believe, to identify the counties within the United Kingdom that you may have ancestors from. Initially, they did not have matching, and so the first couple of years I didn't really rate them, but now that they have had matching for a couple of years, they are starting to increase. Now, one thing I will say, from a percentage-wise, Living DNA had the largest increase in their overall score of any of the companies. They are starting at the bottom, I agree, and so there's lots of room for them to grow, but they are rapidly starting to gain some ground. We'll see whether or not that's going to be enough in the next few years to maybe overtake some of these other companies. So then we go to number 5. Now, number 5, I'll admit I'm a little bit disappointed in, because 23andMe was the first company I tested with. For a long time, they were my favorite company, and sometimes I might even say they might still be my favorite company. And that might just be because they were the first one I tested with, and so I have that affinity to them. But they've been slowly going down in the rankings, and I think it is because there hasn't been as much genealogy innovation for them as with the other companies. I understand this. 23andMe was not founded as a genetic genealogy company. They were founded as a way to do medical research with DNA. And so there's not as many tools from a genetic genealogist standpoint to be able to do that. Now, they do have a large database size, which continues to grow, which is very helpful to them. Right now, their score overall is 2.30 for the number 5 spot. Number 4 on this list, it happens to be Family Tree DNA. This is the oldest of the genetic genealogy testing companies. Their main drawback, I would say, why they are so far down on this list, because they did have one of the categories that they're the top on, and it's one of the most important categories. Their main drawback is the size of their database. They're only about 1.5 to 2 million, and they have not grown like the other companies have. That being said, they do have some of the extra things like Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing that you can't get at the other companies, and they do have some really good tools to use as well. But because that database size is so small, it really limits how much information you're going to be able to get out of them. Now, coming in at number 3, this was a big surprise to me because Ancestry has actually been on top for the last 3 years, I believe, and they dropped all the way down to number 3. Part of it, I think, is my fooling around with the numbers, changing stuff. But I fool around with the numbers before I go in and update all the data from the websites. So I'm not purposely trying to throw Ancestry in the number 3 spot. Just with this ranking system, that's where they sort out. Now, you'll notice from the score, 2.70, they're just above where Family Tree DNA is. They don't allow transfers, so they get 0 points for that area and lose something from that. But I'm not going to say that they're not a good company. They are still a great company. They still have a lot of things to offer. Particularly, they've got the largest database. So if you are not in the Ancestry database and you have to test to be in the Ancestry database, you should go and do that now. Number 2, you probably are not expecting this based on what you saw, because GEDmatch actually won in 3 of the 5 categories. So you're wondering, wait a second, how could they not be number 1 if they won in 3 of the 5 categories? It comes down to those first 2 categories, which are the most important categories, the database size and the quality match score. Now, GEDmatch overall is well ahead of where Ancestry is, so I don't expect them to be overtaken necessarily anytime soon. But because of the database size, that's really limited as far as the total number of points that they can gather. And that's where they're going to stand right now, which means we have number 1. And this, to me, is not a surprise. It may be a surprise if you've been watching so far and you haven't seen their name really mentioned, because they didn't win in any category, and that is MyHeritage. Now, the reason why it's not a surprise to me is if you go back and you review the 2021 update, I showed how MyHeritage was really right on the cusp of taking over that number 1 spot. And there was a couple of different scenarios that I showed as far as, hey, if they just add another 1 million people to their database, that could push them over, or some other things. Well, in the last year, that's what they did. Their database size grew, plus they added some other tools that really help out. And from what I've seen, their quality match score is great. So MyHeritage wins the best genetic genealogy websites, not because they are the best at any one thing. They're not. As you saw, they didn't win a single category, but they do everything really well. And that's why they've come out on top. Now, as that score grows, they may start winning some of those individual categories, but in my opinion, MyHeritage right now for 2022 is the best genetic genealogy website. It's one that you should get on if you're not already. You can get on there by transferring your DNA into their database, and that can be an Ancestry or 23andMe or a family tree DNA for that matter. Or you can test with them as well. I hope you liked this update to the best genetic genealogy website. If you want to go back and watch the 2021, you can watch this video up here, and you'll see that I predict that MyHeritage may be the #1 company in the coming year. Or if you want to learn something else about genetic genealogy, then watch this video down below. There, you got my poses.